The creature was there standing at the top of the stairs. It looked vaguely human, but its limbs were too long and its face was covered in eyes. Dozens of them all fixed on Cole. Its bony arms reached out, and before he could even think to scream, it lunged at him. Cole let out a terrified shriek as the creature grabbed him, dragging him back toward the attic. His hands scrambled for something to hold on to, the wall, the stairs, but his fingers slipped, and then silence. The rusty hinges creaked softly as the loose boards swayed slightly. Cole carefully grabbed onto the next one, feeling with his feet for a stable spot. The two-story house was in terrible condition. No one was even thinking about relocating the tenants yet. Though from time to time, small repairs were done. People were just waiting for the whole thing to collapse like a house of cards before doing anything drastic. The stairs creaked ominously, making Cole think they might just tear away from the wall and crash down, taking him with them. "You're sure you'll be okay, Cole?" his grandmother asked nervously. "Don't worry, Grandma," he reassured her with a grin. The boy turned his head and looked down, holding a coil of rope in his left hand. With effort, he pulled the attic hatch open. "Heavy thing. It'll be even harder to close it with those barely attached hinges," he muttered under his breath. The whole thing seemed designed to be as difficult as possible. A light draft blew a cloud of dust into his face as the hatch opened, preventing Cole from getting a better look at the attic. He sneezed loudly, shaking his head and nearly losing his balance. "Careful not to fall," Grandma called out, startled. "Read about it, Grandma. People like you, the moment their grandkids cough or sneeze, they think it's their fault," he teased. "They worry they didn't watch the kid well enough or did something wrong." His grandmother was one of those people, someone who always listened, gave solid advice, and comforted with a gentle pat on the head. There was no one quite like her. After shoving the hatch all the way open, Cole hoisted himself into the attic, trying not to dirty his pants too much. He dropped the rope down. "Grandma, let me do it. I'll take care of it myself," he offered. No, you're not going back and forth. Just tie the bucket and hoist it up." Cole sighed but agreed, quickly pulling up the empty bucket she had tied to the rope. The roof leaked during rainy weather, especially in the fall when water poured from the sky. Repairmen reluctantly addressed the issue, often passing the buck to other agencies. As a result, the residents placed buckets in the most vulnerable spots, and during heavy rains, would empty them every few days. Since most of the residents were elderly, there weren't many willing hands to do the job. It just so happened that Uncle from the first floor went on vacation, and another neighbor was away on a business trip. That's when Grandma called Cole. He had already planned to stay with her for the weekend, and now he had the chance to help the whole building. It was a good deed, and he could boast to his friends about doing something brave, climbing into the attic, dealing with dust, cobwebs, and heights. Besides, it was better than being stuck inside with nothing to do on a rainy day. By the end of summer break, Cole was starting to wish for school to start again. Though he knew when the final days of freedom came, he'd curse himself for having those thoughts. Look around carefully. We need to empty all the buckets, even if they're only half full or less. There should be 2 more to the right, not far from you, and a few more near the corners. See them? Grandma's voice echoed up to him. "Yeah, I'll check," Cole replied. He turned on his flashlight, breaking through the thick darkness, and looked around. The large, dusty room had a strange allure to it. It had been a while since he'd been up here, but nothing had changed, except for the bucket arrangement. The attic seemed even darker now, despite the hour not being that late. The small windows, the only other sources of light aside from his flashlight, let in almost no light, only preventing rain from getting in. The growing twilight outside made it feel like he'd stepped into a forgotten castle, or a scene from a horror game. The faint outlines of wooden beams and abandoned construction materials appeared menacing, like he was a little kid again, afraid of the monster under his bed, ready to snatch his foot the moment he left it exposed. Even though he told himself it was silly, Cole still wrapped his legs tightly under his blanket at night, especially after watching a scary movie. Now, the shadows around the room seemed to writhe and crawl along the walls, getting closer to him as his flashlight beam flickered. The darkness was making him see things that weren't there. That shadow over there? It was just a piece of wood leaning against a beam. But what if something thin and ghostly was hiding behind it, waiting for him to get closer? Or worse, what if, when he looked up, something horrible was staring down at him from the ceiling, its mouth wide open and empty eyes watching? His heart raced as the image flashed in his mind. Taking a deep breath, he aimed his flashlight at the rotting ceiling above, searching every inch. Of course, there was nothing. Cole! His grandma's shout startled him, and he reflexively loosened his grip. The bucket dropped, and the handle painfully smacked his fingers. Dang it, he cursed. I'm coming. Totally forgot what I was doing, he muttered, frustrated with himself. He emptied the first bucket into his container and placed it back in the exact same spot. Cole then made his way to the hatch, carefully attaching the bucket to the rope. He slowly lowered it down, being cautious not to bang it against the steps or spill any water. His grandmother had already gone inside to dump the water, so Cole squatted down, shining his flashlight around the attic again. His initial curiosity faded, replaced by a growing desire to leave as soon as possible. Each second spent up there felt more uncomfortable and dangerous. Dangerous? Cole thought to himself, surprised by the word that popped into his mind. It was just a dusty old attic. What could be dangerous about it? Nothing, he answered himself quickly. It's just my imagination acting up. He worked more quickly, knowing there was only one more bucket left before he could go downstairs to enjoy the pancakes his grandmother promised. Pancakes so good, you'd lick your fingers clean. With those thoughts motivating him, Cole emptied the last of the water into his container and dropped the bucket. All done, he said with relief. Well done, my boy, Grandma called from below, a big smile lighting up her face. You're quite the helper. I'll take care of the last bucket myself when I come up. Now, go ahead and rest. I'll make you some potatoes while I finish up here. Cole nodded and awkwardly felt for the first step with his foot. This whole thing's built for mutants, not people, he muttered to himself. Every movement needed to be careful, or he really would take a tumble. Sure, he wouldn't die from a fall, but he'd definitely bang up his legs pretty bad. He cast one last glance back at the attic and frowned. What the heck? In the far corner, something moved, rustling slightly. It was thin and almost invisible, like a shadow or a long silhouette, quickly appearing and disappearing again into the darkness. It was so fast, it was as if nothing had been there at all. But Cole was sure he heard something. Maybe it was a cat. But if so, where had it been hiding while he was walking around? To get a better look at whatever had made the sound, Cole would have to go back and investigate. But did he really want to? The urge to take another look was strong, but so was the feeling that he should just hurry down and forget it happened. The noise came again, louder this time, from another corner, closer to him. Cole's face flushed, and his heart pounded so hard it hurt. He turned so quickly that his foot slipped on the step, and he barely managed to catch the edge of the attic opening. Phew, that was close, he whispered. Could have broken a leg for sure. Brushing aside the growing sense of dread, he quickly closed the attic hatch, making sure not to pinch his fingers in the process. He fastened the hook, trying to ignore the creepy feeling of cobwebs clinging to his hair. In a few swift movements, he was on solid ground and slipped back into the apartment, finally letting out a sigh of relief. What an idiot, he muttered to himself. Got all scared over nothing. But deep down, he was glad he had decided to come down. His room was getting darker by the minute, the rain pouring down in heavy sheets outside. The rhythmic patter of raindrops on the window was oddly soothing, lulling Cole into a sleepy state. Without waiting for his grandmother, he turned off the computer and crawled into bed, pulling out his phone to message his best friend. After telling his friend that he'd been up in the attic, Cole decided not to go into too much detail about his scare. Totally forgot to take a pic of the attic, he texted. Did you even go up there? His friend quickly replied. "You'd be surprised," Cole responded. "I thought I saw something in the dark corner, like an animal or something. It was weird." "Could have been a bum hiding up there," his friend joked. Cole hadn't even considered that. "Nah, I don't think so. It felt different. But never mind. I should have brought my phone to snap a picture. Guess I'll just have to go back tomorrow." A loud noise interrupted Cole's train of thought, a low, dragging sound coming from the attic above. It sounded like a heavy piece of furniture being moved across the floor. The problem was, there was nothing that big up there. Goosebumps prickled his arms, and he froze. There was no way he was going back up there, especially not in the dark. Cole lifted his head from his pillow, fully awake now. The comforting warmth of his room had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. The only sound was the relentless rain pounding on the roof, but even that rhythmic noise wasn't enough to calm his nerves. The room, once cozy, now felt unfamiliar and threatening. Even his t-shirt draped over the chair seemed unnerving, like someone was crouching there watching him. His phone buzzed with a new message, but Cole ignored it. A flash of lightning lit up the sky outside, and Cole flinched, convinced for a moment he saw a dark stain spreading across the ceiling above him, inching its way toward his bed. The dragging noise from the attic continued, growing louder and closer, as if something was slowly creeping down toward him, knowing exactly where he lay. It reminded him of childhood nights when he would pull the blanket over his head, hoping the covers would protect him from any lurking monsters. But now, trembling with fear, Cole somehow found the strength to leap out of bed. He rushed to the desk, turning on the lamp as quickly as possible, avoiding looking at the ceiling or the chair. As expected, there was nothing there. But the sound above him didn't stop. It seemed to follow him. Heavy footsteps echoed from above, right over his head, causing the ceiling to creak under the pressure. Then, as if confirming his worst fears, a low, threatening growl came through the ceiling, making Cole sprint toward the door. He ran out into the hallway, only to crash straight into his grandmother. "Oh my, what a storm out there," she said, startled by the tight hug Cole suddenly gave her. Normally he wasn't much for hugs, but right now he clung to her. "I just got up to check on you. Is everything all right?" Grandma asked, hugging him back. Cole's heart was still racing, but the whole ordeal was already starting to feel like a dream. He was embarrassed by his reaction. Had it all been in his head? The shadows, the noises, that growl? He hated feeling like a scared little kid again. "I thought I heard something upstairs, like someone walking around," Cole mumbled, his face flushed with shame. "Oh, nonsense," Grandma replied confidently. "It's probably just the storm. Maybe you heard the wind or rain. Don't worry about it." "Yeah, that must have been it," Cole agreed, rubbing his eyes. The fear was fading quickly now, and the logical part of his brain was taking over. "I must have mixed up the sounds from outside with something else." They both paused to listen, but the house was completely silent now. "Go on to bed," Grandma said softly, patting his arm. "There's nothing to be afraid of." Feeling slightly foolish, Cole nodded. He said goodnight, though he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling entirely. He didn't hear anything else as he lay back in bed, but that didn't make it any easier to sleep. His mind kept playing tricks on him. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak felt like something was sneaking closer. But after a while, exhaustion took over, and he drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, the last thing Cole wanted to do was go back up to the attic. The memory of his nightmare still hung over him, though he wasn't about to tell his grandma that. He wasn't a little kid anymore, and he wasn't about to act like one, especially after last night. But when his grandma asked him to check the buckets again, Cole forced a smile and nodded. "Sure thing," he said, trying to sound more cheerful than he felt. "No problem." He climbed up the creaky old stairs, wincing as his head bumped the hatch when he pushed it open. "Ouch," he muttered. "All good, Grandma," he called down, waving her off as she looked up from below. Pushing the hatch all the way open, Cole immediately noticed something different. The familiar stale smell of dust and dampness was mixed with something else, something that made his stomach turn. An odor like rotten eggs or spoiled meat. It was faint, but there. Cole wrinkled his nose in disgust. It reminded him too much of his nightmare. Trying to push those thoughts away, he focused on the task at hand. He lowered himself into the attic, careful not to let the foul smell distract him. His flashlight flickered to life as he moved toward the buckets. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and flinging leaves against the glass, making scratching sounds like claws trying to break through. "Relax, dummy," he told himself. "It's a sunny day outside, with kids running in the park, and my birthday's coming up." As he got closer to the corner of the attic, where the smell was the strongest, Cole hesitated. He took a deep breath and examined the area more carefully. The darkness seemed to pull back just a little as his flashlight beam swept over it, revealing a mostly empty corner. Phew. He let out a relieved breath, laughing at himself. There was nothing there after all. The smell? Probably just something rotten that got stuck in the walls. No big deal. He emptied the bucket, then made his way back toward the hatch, but something tugged at his memory. "Almost forgot," Cole said, slapping his forehead. "The photo." Pulling out his phone, he smiled to himself. It might not be the most exciting picture, but it was proof he'd been up here. Cole snapped a quick selfie, the dark, shadowy attic framing his face in the background. The bright flash left him blinking for a second, and a familiar unease washed over him. For a moment, he half expected to see the grotesque face of his nightmare grandma looming behind him, mouth open, eyes melting down her cheeks. "Stop it," Cole told himself firmly, shaking his head. "There's nothing there." But when he looked back at the photo on his phone, his stomach dropped. At first glance, it seemed normal. Just him, the dusty attic behind him. But when he zoomed in, he saw it. Something black and twisted sticking out from behind the corner. A long, dark limb, thin and bony, reaching out as if to grab him. It stood out starkly against the dim background, and it looked too real to be a trick of the light. Cole's heart pounded, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He could feel it now. Something was behind him. He could sense its presence. His skin crawled as the shadows in the attic seemed to grow darker, closing in around him. Without thinking, Cole spun around. Nothing. There was nothing there. But his instincts told him otherwise. He could feel something that was watching him, moving closer. Fear surged through him, his legs trembling. Cole took a deep, shaky breath and tried to steady himself, but his mind was racing. That thing in the photo, it was real. And it was here. He knew it. Without another thought, Cole bolted toward the hatch, not caring that he dropped his flashlight. He leaped down the stairs, skipping the last few steps and landing hard on his feet, wincing in pain. He rushed toward the apartment door, wanting to get as far away from the attic as possible. But then he froze, the realization hitting him like a punch in the gut. He hadn't closed the hatch. His mind screamed at him to keep going, to leave the apartment and forget about it. But something wouldn't let him. He turned slowly, his eyes lifting to the attic. The creature was there, standing at the top of the stairs. It looked vaguely human, but its limbs were too long, and its face was covered in eyes. Dozens of them, all fixed on Cole. Its bony arms reached out, and before he could even think to scream, it lunged at him. Cole let out a terrified shriek as the creature grabbed him, dragging him back toward the attic. His hands scrambled for something to hold on to, the wall, the stairs, but his fingers slipped, and then silence. By the time his grandmother rushed to the stairs, all she found was the bucket lying on the floor. The attic was eerily quiet. By the time the police arrived, there was no trace of Cole anywhere. They combed through the attic, sweeping away the hanging cobwebs as they searched every corner, but there was nothing. "Anything?" called a familiar voice from below. It was the doctor, an old family friend who had come when Cole's grandmother had a panic attack after discovering her grandson had disappeared. "Nothing," one of the officers muttered under his breath. "This whole thing makes no sense. Where could the kid have gone? He was in his pajamas." The officer stepped to the edge of the attic hatch, shaking his head. It felt wrong, standing up there in the dim light, like something was watching him. This was just a dusty old attic, and yet it gave him the creeps. It was almost laughable that after all the crime scenes he had investigated over the years, a simple attic in a rundown building could make him feel this uneasy. The darkness in the far corner was especially unsettling. "You coming down?" the doctor called again. The officer hesitated, turning to glance at that dark corner one last time. It felt like if he looked away, something would materialize. A childhood nightmare come to life. He quickly shook off the thought, laughing at himself as he descended the stairs. But just as his feet touched the ground, a soft rustling sound came from the far corner of the attic. The shadows there seemed to shift and deepen, and for a brief second, he could have sworn he saw a long, thin figure crouching in the darkness. He froze, his heart pounding. But when he turned back to look, the figure was gone. It was just the shadows playing tricks on him. He let out a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "Enough of this," he whispered, stepping away from the attic. "This place is getting to me." He quickly closed the hatch behind him, wiping the sweat from his brow with a shaky hand. What a ridiculous thought. He'd let an attic scare him. There was nothing here, just shadows, dust, and old wood. But in the darkness of the attic, something had stirred. The long, thin creature with too many eyes had no interest in the officer. It licked its lips with a long, forked tongue, satisfied with the boy it had already claimed. It had no need for anyone else. For now, it could wait. It had all the time in the world.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together we can take this channel to the next level, and don't forget to check out this video.